I'm gonna do a 101 all about the Proov Confirm PDG Strips. So let's just break down our cycle really quick and what we expect in each of the phases. So phase 1 is our follicular phase that starts with day 1 of our period. At this time, all of our hormones are fairly low at the very beginning of our cycle. This is why it's great to get day 3 hormones for those things like estrogen, FSH, and LH. But as that continues to go on through the follicular phase, FSH is going to grow, estradiol is going to grow also. FSH is our follicle stimulating hormone. It's made by the pituitary gland and it communicates with our ovaries to tell our eggs to start developing and getting ready. And then with the help of estrogen, which is a growth hormone, those follicles begin to develop and grow. That's going to keep happening. And then as your estrogen gets high enough, when it peaks, that signals to the brain to produce LH, or luteinizing hormone. Luteinizing hormone is also going to come from your pituitary, and it's going to communicate to your ovary to release the dominant follicle. So whatever follicle became the biggest, the fastest, is the dominant one, and it gets released into your fallopian tubes. Then you have an empty sac from that egg, it recloses up, and that becomes what is called your corpus luteum. Now your corpus luteum is what is going to pump out progesterone for the remainder of your cycle. And ovulation is important at all times, not just during fertility or when you're trying to conceive, because ovulation is the only way we make progesterone for our body. So when we're on things like birth control and we shut down ovulation, our body is no longer able to produce progesterone. And progesterone is super important for tons of functions in the body, not just, conceiving and growing a baby. But so LH spikes, and now your corpus luteum is pumping out progesterone. If you track your basal body temps, they should remain in the ideally 97.2 to the 97.8 range during follicular time. And that's because estrogen keeps that a little bit lower. But then once you ovulate, progesterone is thermogenic, so it's going to increase those temps. So you should see a 0.5 to 1.0 increase in your body temp after you ovulate. That temperature should stay elevated throughout your luteal phase. And then using the Proovstrips is a great way to make sure not only that you ovulated, but that you're ovulating successfully, aka making enough progesterone for a fertilized embryo to implant and continue to grow. So the way the strips work is you get 5 in a box, you use one of them the day after your period, and that measures your baseline progesterone levels so that you have a starting spot. So you would do that either day 5 or the day after your period ends. That's your baseline. Then through tracking things like cervical mucus, using LH strips, you can predict ovulation. Then you'll use your basal body temps to confirm ovulation. And then 7 days after that peak, you'll do another Proov test. So it's used on your first urine in the morning, and you'll do that for the next 4 days. And what it's measuring is called PDG, and it is a metabolite of progesterone. So as progesterone gets metabolized and broken down, it gets excreted through your urine in the form of PDG, and that's what these measure. So it's a little bit different than if you were getting progesterone measured on blood work, because that's progesterone in your blood. And this is coming out in your urine after it's been metabolized. But it's really helpful to see a minimum of 3, preferably 4 positive days on 7, 8, 9, and 10 after ovulation. This is when your progesterone level should ideally be the highest. This is when you are going to implant, most likely if you do have a fertilized embryo, and you want your uterine lining to be nice and thick and sticky and waiting to receive that embryo and then help it continue to grow. Remember, our corpus luteum is going to make our progesterone for the first 12-ish weeks of pregnancy until the placenta takes over. So we want a really healthy, robust corpus luteum so that we can sustain our pregnancy. when you do the strips, you'll use them again in your first urine, and these are a little bit backwards in the sense of strips, the way that LH or HCG strips or even pregnancy strips work, in that usually a positive is 2 lines. With Proov strips, a positive is 1 line. So when you pee on them, you'll wait 10 minutes, and if you see 1 line, that's a sign that your progesterone was 5 or higher, which is considered a positive. If you see 2 lines, it means it was under 5. And Proov has this really great app that allows you to actually scan a picture of the strip, and it will tell you your actual reading, which I think is really helpful. So it'll tell you if your reading was a 1 or a 3 or a 2.5 or a 4.5. And that's helpful to notice trends over time. So I do definitely recommend using the app in addition to the strips. And it can be a really great way to pinpoint areas you need to work on, because we need to remember that ovulation only happens when there is an abundance of energy and nutrients in the body. So if we're noticing that our luteal phase is maybe only 10 days and we don't get positive Proov strips, or we only get 1 or 2, that's showing us that our body needs a little bit of nourishment and a little bit of nurturing. And that will come through things like, nutrient-dense foods, eating enough, prioritizing sleep, reducing stressors, all those types of things that I talk about on a regular basis. But this is a great way, it's a tool in the toolbox to give you more information. The more information you have, the better you can, prepare and pinpoint areas of need. One of the biggest things I see women going wrong with when they're trying to conceive is wasting cycle after cycle because they assume they make enough progesterone. And they assume that their progesterone stays high. So they're like, oh, I ovulated, I'm good to go. But if your progesterone's, going up and then it's dropping, you're never gonna successfully implant. And I think, getting a progesterone blood test on 7 days after your ovulation by your doctor can be helpful. It can let you know what your progesterone levels are. And, but unfortunately, it doesn't let us know if those levels stay high. So they could drop off that very next day and you would never know. And then again, we're wasting cycle after cycle by not pinpointing those issues and working on them. We're just kind of blindly moving forward, assuming that, we make enough progesterone. So yeah, I recommend, and I usually ask all of my clients to do at least 2 cycles in a row of the Proov strips. A lot of them end up using them every cycle. I know they can be a little bit on the pricey side, but the information you get is invaluable, especially if you're notice that they're low and then you're working to fix it. It can be really helpful to use these in conjunction with tracking your basal body temps. And then if you want to use the LH strips for predicting ovulation, that's fine, but just a reminder, those only predict ovulation, they don't confirm. Basal body temps and these strips will confirm that you've ovulated and made enough progesterone. So yeah, I do recommend getting these and using them even just for 1 cycle to make sure you're making enough progesterone. Progesterone is the female hormone, contrary to what everyone talks about. Everyone thinks estrogen. Progesterone is actually the female hormone. And so it's super important to have at all times, not just when you're trying to conceive, but it's especially necessary when trying to conceive. And low progesterone and luteal phase defect, aka what I'm talking about, this low progesterone, short luteal phase, is a contributing factor to early miscarriage. So if you can avoid, going through that, then I think these are a great option. All right, that's all I have on Proov.